I was starting to feel a bit cynical, so I decided that it was time to get into something new and something different. But I think that I was really struggling to try and find a way.
Could you walk us through how ProTouch works?
We're looking to monetize that by bringing, exclusive merchandise, the ability for fans to connect directly with athletes. We've basically built out LinkedIn for athletes, if you think of it like that.
How would you define a white space idea engineer?
I suppose white space is the journey less traveled. So, in business, very often what happens is you end up with all these ideas operating or around the market that are really all the same. So then the competitiveness becomes so much more difficult. So white space engineering is about finding those.
Rebecca, why do you do the work that you do?
So I think, most of my career I've really been involved in purpose-led projects. So I think that, any of the work that I do is typically driven around some form of purpose-led initiatives. I think that I primarily try and focus on sort of strategic intent, technology capabilities to bring together opportunities that can actually have impact in some shape or form.
And this need to be a purpose-driven organization and do purpose-led work, was this something that was cultivated when you were growing up in your early environment?
I don't think so. I think I started out in publishing, and that really sort of took me on a journey through producing publications around life stages and events. So I suppose the purpose there was, people are traveling on a journey, getting married, having a baby, sending a child to school. And I was finding as I was journeying through those different phases that there was very little information available. So I started a publishing business that produced publications around those different life stages and events. So that was kind of my start into a career. I then sold that business into what was Jonic Communications, and I then joined the startup team for the MySchool card. And that was really my sort of first real introduction into sort of impact-driven or purpose-driven focuses. MySchool was started out to assist parents and schools in the fundraising requirements that was needed to, add on a new library, do renovations to a pool, add on extra classrooms, etc. So the MySchool card really came about aggregating parents and family members to shop at various retailers in order to generate a revenue stream that would go back to their child's school or a nominated school. That project originally started out as a multi-partner, so there were multiple retailers in different categories, and from there it then started focusing on Woolworths, and Woolworths then became the prime partner. They ultimately then owned the product, they actually purchased it. And, during that time of working on MySchool, I got to interact with lots of different retailers and brands and companies at the very sort of early stages of loyalty and rewards. So I had the pleasure of working in various capacities of, strategy development, implementing loyalty and rewards programs across multiple retailers, multiple financial services companies, and healthcare. So, that really took me through different journeys of purpose-led things. When we worked on some of the healthcare projects, it was about, driving more activity and getting customers or members to be more healthy. In the space of sort of retail and the healthcare side, it was very much driven around a percentage of spend going back to a nominated cause. So I think, most of that sort of early stage of business, I was very exposed to sort of purpose-led projects.
Okay, and speaking about MySchool, what did that experience teach you in terms of growing a business to now what it is? Of course, you left the MySchool space, but you were still instrumental in the early success of it. How was that achieved?
Well, it was also early stage technology. We're going back to sort of 1994, 1995. So a lot of the work that we were doing was still very manual. So we had, duplicate carbon copy books that sat at retailers. When somebody came and purchased at a small sort of mom and pop store, they would fill out, the transaction, and then somebody would go and drive around and pick up all of those slips of paper and take it back to an office, and obviously then manually capture a lot of that. In the bigger retailers like Woolworths and the like, there was a more sort of integrated approach. We then launched a card, which was a magstripe card that allowed for obviously that transaction to be picked up in an electronic form. So I think it really taught me from the ground up how to get a program off the ground nationally across multiple stores, multiple schools, multiple parents, parents with children at multiple, different schools in different grades. So it was a very good training ground around how to actually get something launched and scale that on a national basis, how to put processes in place, how to manage data in a central sort of form, first level of data analytics, understanding consumer spend, preferences, shopping patterns. So it was really a good grounding point from that perspective. And I think it sort of took me then on a 20-year journey through loyalty and rewards programs. So I applied a lot of what I learned at my school into the various other projects.
And fast forwarding a bit, you were also a non-executive director on a JSE listed company. What did that environment, how influential was that environment in your journey?
So the UCS Group was a listed IT company that owned and operated the majority of the point of sale systems in the retailers. So my link to them was obviously through the loyalty and reward side, is that I was often having to work with their subsidiary businesses because we needed to do integration, card readers, data analytics that needed to come out of the point of sale systems into our centralized data. So that was my link to the UCS Group. I was then asked to be a non-executive on the main board, which I did for 2.5, 3 years. And at that point, they then purchased a 51% stake in my business. So at that point, I stepped down as a non-exec because I was obviously now within the group, and I operated that strategy and consulting business in loyalty and rewards within the group then until 2012, when they actually delisted. And at that point, I was working on a number of different retail projects, but I was starting to feel a bit cynical about how many more plastic cards one could have in one's wallet. I had a lot of clients at the time that sort of wanted a program but weren't necessarily understanding what they could actually do with the program. So very often ended up in a sort of marketing department where it was about the pretty card and the brochure and not so much about what it actually could achieve. So I decided that it was time to get into something new and something different. So I completely left the industry. I went into a private equity business, started doing some work in green buildings, renewable energy, and supply chain. 3 things that I knew absolutely nothing about. So yes, that was my next journey.
And speaking about the next journey, how would you define a white space idea engineer?
So I suppose white space is the journey less traveled. So, in business, very often what happens is somebody comes up with an idea and then 10 other people come up with the same idea. And then you end up with all these ideas operating or around the market that are really all the same. So then the competitiveness becomes so much more difficult. So white space engineering is about finding those untapped areas, the things that are maybe not so obvious to everybody else, and creating space and innovating. So for a number of years, I positioned myself in that kind of white space engineering sort of phase of, coming up with new ideas, new ways of doing things.
Okay, and this was a theme in your next endeavor with Liberty becoming MD, and that being in the rewards and loyalty space, was that did it also give you this competitive advantage to essentially help Liberty?
Not really. I think I'd always worked with corporate clients, but obviously in a sort of personal capacity as a consultant or a strategist. I'd never actually been physically in a corporate. So my journey into Liberty was through a previous client of mine who had moved across to Liberty and had been asked to relook at the rewards and loyalty program that the group was managing. It was in quite a cluttered space with lots and lots of other insurance and medical aid or medical insurance companies that were all playing in that space around the same time. And it was probably their third or fourth attempt at trying to get something going that at least equaled, if not bettered, what their competitors had in the market. So I was actually brought in to primarily come and reinvigorate the program and either look to completely disrupt it and change it, close it down, or to come up with something new. So it was a 2-year project. It was quite interesting being an entrepreneur in a corporate environment like that, and a very sort of male-oriented, 60-year-old financial services business. So it was a fairly interesting time. It was probably a year longer for me and for them, to be honest. but it was a good experience, and it was great to see just what happens inside a big ship like that. But I think as an entrepreneur, my natural inhibition is more around creating things and not waiting for red tape and 100 different departments to agree to do something before one can ever get it done. So I think the pace for me was a little slower than I would have liked. And as I said, I think that many large businesses often want to innovate but find it difficult to do so, because they've put so many structures in place to manage all the things that are happening in the operation that it becomes difficult to be nimble and agile to get things to market quickly. So
How do they still remain at the front of so many different industries with their products and service offerings if they have a lot of bureaucracy, a lot of systems in place, structures in place that allows them to not be agile and move quickly?
Look, I think your very established large corporate organizations become very product focused, so they're able to push out product in whatever industry sector fairly swiftly because they have the infrastructure to do that. But I think that the world is changing somewhat around, it's not just about putting more products in front of customers, it's about understanding what customers actually need and developing new ways to service those customers. So I think that, and certainly not just in financial services, across the board, I think that the move away from just being product focused and churning out products has really moved more to, what customers need and the why. And I think that has opened the door specifically in places like South Africa, where younger, smaller, more agile companies are able to come in, be quicker, be more nimble, be more agile. And over time, I suppose corporates do start to lose market share to those smaller entities.
I guess that's where the white space thinking comes in, to continue to stay above the rest and disrupt and not be competing in the same space.
Absolutely. I mean, I think also older, more structured businesses also have a lot of legacy technology that also slows them down, where agile, smaller businesses have access to new technologies. They can plug and play much quicker than, let's say, a large organization that's got multiple systems operating across multiple different areas. I think also corporates tend to not really want to cannibalize their own existing business, which sometimes is needed. It's kind of the adapt or die. So, evolving sometimes requires them to cannibalize some of their existing business. And I suppose if one considers that most corporates are incentivized with KPIs, you often find then that innovation is constantly fighting against just keeping the status quo and achieving the current numbers and the KPIs that need to be met.
Yeah, it almost seems that there has to be a different department and division just for innovation.
100%. And internationally and locally, there are a lot of corporates that actually set up these standalone, almost incubators, and allow a management team to actually operate outside of the current structure in order to stimulate that kind of thinking. But at some point, they'll very often then bring that incubator back into the bigger ship. So I think, the challenge is getting that balance right, of being able to give management and the right people the freedom to develop and create what they need to, but not be constrained by the infrastructure that is supporting that. And then migrating that into the broader ship if need be, in a way that doesn't then put it all on hold again.
Definitely. And moving on, you then joined Supersport Schools. How was that journey for you?
So actually, when I left Liberty, I went back out on my own again first, and I started looking into sport. So and so Supersport Schools was actually a client of mine. So I was really in a consulting capacity. I was part of the startup team that got the Supersport Schools project underway. Supersport Schools is basically a business that live streams school sport at hundreds of schools countrywide using AI-based cameras that are installed at the schools, and then streaming that content directly into a mobile app where friends, family, and the athletes themselves can go back in and watch the highlights, create highlights, share them with friends and family, etc. So Supersport Schools was a client of mine for the first 3 years, when I started shifting out of typical retail financial services, loyalty and rewards. I was looking for something new, and sport was an area that I had started to focus in on. So that's my journey with Supersport Schools.
Was it also a passion of yours?
It started to become a passion, the sports side. I have 4 children, and my third child was a professional road cyclist. So over that time, from 2016 through to 2022, we as a family actually owned and managed a professional cycling team. That was a continental team. It was the top team in Africa, and we had 26 riders from 6 African countries. And so I'd started to get passionate about sport really because I was starting to deal with athletes and trying to find solutions around funding teams and athletes, etc. So when the Supersport Schools opportunity came along, I think it was aligned with really understanding how one could find new ways to fund sport and fund athletes. And obviously the South African school system is a very sophisticated school setup in terms of sport. So it aligned with some of the things that I'd started to think about. We built out a mobile app with the partners who manage the AI-based cameras. So I project managed a fair amount of the build of that app and the installations at the schools, and really starting to understand digital rights licenses, broadcasting. So we were a small team, and it was really a startup because it was an idea that got going, and it was all hands on deck getting everything done. So the first 3 years were very much everybody doing a bit of everything. Obviously now the structure of the business is much more sort of structured. It's now in-house back within the MultiChoice Group. So I have a more sort of ad hoc relationship now. But obviously those first 3 years was a lot of operational implementations, technology, etc.
And what is the business model of Supersport Schools?
So primarily, I think they're just over 700,000 subscribers now. The business model is primarily an advertising driven revenue model. So Supersport have these cameras up. They are able to be turned on and off remotely, so one can do more sport more often. And obviously it's the games that I suppose people should be passionate about most, because it's usually their children. So the model is a sort of longer term tail in terms of, one is building, number one, a database of subscribers. The product is currently still free to subscribers, so they merely have to register. But in doing that, one also then has the ability to start to create a platform where one could market products and services that are relevant to that market base. From a Supersports perspective, it's also about attracting a younger audience. So, younger audiences come in the form of the children that are at the school, and for them to interact with the brand in a different way to maybe the way their parents or their grandparents interacted with the brand. So the business model is driven around e-commerce, data analytics, being able to match products and services directly with the audiences. And obviously with that comes new ways of advertising for brands, new ways to show return on investment for advertisers in a different format to obviously what the core business does.
And how did the idea for ProTouch start? Was the seeds planted in the supersport journey, and then of course the cycling, investing in the cycling team?
No, so the ProTouch business started prior to me starting at Supersport Schools. As I said, we started a cycling team partly because we had a child coming through the system that was, not seemingly together with a number of his peers at the time, being able to find elite teams that were taking sort of first year under 23s. So the team got started in 2016 under the ProTouch brand. And while we were assisting with funding a lot of these athletes and finding ways to give them access to international competition, we were obviously also looking for ways to fund this, because while it sometimes is easier to get bicycles and helmets and glasses funded, there's always the cash component of flights and salaries and staff and all the things that you need in and around a team. So the ProTouch brand already started before I had even started at Supersport. But I think that I was really struggling to try and find a way to fund we would call a Cinderella sport. While a lot of people in South Africa do participate in cycling, the professional arm of cycling is not well funded. There isn't enough TV coverage, there isn't enough exposure internationally. In the country. So riders who are wanting to actually get into these international teams are actually having to travel to Europe, having to travel overseas to do that. So I was really trying to find a solution to this funding problem, because obviously it was now costing us a lot more money than I think we ever anticipated when we started. And that was really how I ended up then in the journey that we are now. I started looking at fan engagement, started trying to understand where all the different revenue streams came from in sport, what different sporting codes were doing. And as we sort of journeyed through the COVID periods where obviously there wasn't a lot of sport happening, I came across this concept of fan engagement, which isn't really a large move from loyalty and rewards. It's just obviously a different wrapping paper. And I came across a number of different platforms based out of Europe or based out of the States that were building fan engagement platforms specifically for clubs, sports teams, and brands. And so, the start of this journey with fan engagement started there. I took the distributor license for a platform based out of Switzerland, brought it back to South Africa, and we started building out a fan app to aggregate African cycling. So that was really where this journey started. We traveled a number of different areas with this particular platform provider. We were involved in helping with the Belgium cycling app that was built out for Belgium cycling. And then we started looking at Africa as a whole and saying, okay, what are the industry sectors here or different sporting codes that potentially this platform could be used for? So we sort of parked what we were doing on the cycling side for a while and started working on a number of different projects to really roll out fan engagement platforms for different sports codes and teams. And that was obviously, the plan was to obviously look at using that to help to fund what we were trying to do on the cycling side.
Before we get into how the app actually works and the fan engagement part, I'd like to just come up or just ask you a few definitions. So could you please define for us what is meant by Web3?
Okay, so sure. Okay, so Web3, I suppose, is the current platform that most forward-looking businesses that are operating within the internet space are moving towards. So it's a much more inclusive and interactive experience between the user and the platform, and allows for fans or users of a particular technology environment to be able to interact with the content as opposed to being just a one-way stream. So Web 1 was sort of early stages of the internet and websites where you could just access information. As things progressed, it moved into sort of Web 2, where there was maybe a little bit more interactivity, but Web 3 is very much around how individuals or users can really actually interact and create more immersive opportunities within the space.
And blockchain, how would you define that?
So the blockchain is really just a ledger. It obviously provides the ability for independence and transparency. So in our world, we believe the blockchain opens so many opportunities to disrupt the sporting sectors around transparency, the ability to track where funding comes from, where it goes to, and how it gets allocated. So it creates a space that a more trusting space, I suppose. So it helps to democratize the way things have been done previously and change the way that people do that in the future.
No need for an intermediate service
100%.
provider.
Absolutely. And I mean, obviously, all the intermediaries at all the different layers all want to earn some money. So, if one cuts out all of those different components, one makes more funding available for what it's needed to be without all of that.
And how would you define an NFT?
Well, an NFT stands for a non-fungible token. We've been through many iterations over the past few years around NFTs, and as many people love them, hate them. I think in the world that we're playing in, we believe that NFTs and probably what we would prefer to rather just define them as digital collectibles are again a way for brands, specifically within the sports space or athletes, to be able to add value or unlock value for fans. So, the opportunity of being able to collect digital collectibles, be able to trade those, be able to unlock new benefits and a new relationship with a brand is the space we believe that NFTs should be involved in, not selling a piece of artwork for a ridiculous amount of money and hoping that at some point you'll on-sell it to somebody else for a whole lot more.
Okay, and now could you walk us through how ProTouch works?
So ProTouch Africa is basically the business that we operate. We have two sides of the business. We have a consulting and strategy and implementation side of the business where we design and implement fan engagement strategies specifically for clubs, teams, and federations. At its heart, we use our fan engagement platform, which we have the license for here in Africa, to build out fan engagement mobile apps specifically for these brands and teams. And the app is fully customizable, white labeled. The brands are able to integrate their shop for merchandise, have a full match center with statistics and data pulling through around fixtures, sports, scores, and standings. We provide the capability to do voting and polls within the app itself. We have an aggregated newsfeed and social media wall, so the brand is able to actually monetize their own social media. So, pulling through their Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook feeds centrally into the app itself so that the fan is able to easily access content without having to go through their feed and sort of unpack amongst a million adverts. But that does obviously give the brand the ability to also then monetize their own feed with what they want to deliver to the fans. And, we have chat features and various other components within the fan engagement platform. So primarily the one side of the business, as I said, is building those out for our clients and finding new ways to drive or ignite alternative revenue streams specifically for those brands. And then on the other side of the business is our proprietary projects, which is where we take the same strategies that we are implementing for our clients together with the same platform to build out our own proprietary program. And that is the Podium Pursuit project.
Okay, could you walk us through that project?
So Podium Pursuit came about as a result of obviously having the cycling team and trying to find ways to fund it, that I really started to understand the plight of an African athlete in terms of, we all understand that funding is probably the toughest challenge that any athlete has to endure. And specifically in Africa, I think that, while funding is often an issue around the world, the reality is in Africa, it really is a challenge for athletes to be able to access international competition, getting to events, especially in the sort of Cinderella sports, below the sort of top 3 or 4, well-funded team type sports. So Podium Pursuit really came about with us looking for a way to create an ecosystem that incorporated athletes, fans, and brands into a central digital clubhouse where we would be able to leverage building out a fan base that could then be monetized specifically for athletes in terms of funding. So what Podium Pursuit is using the platform that we operate It aggregates 4,500 athletes from 54 countries in Africa across 36 different sports, together with a percentage of their fan base, which currently sits, in terms of those 4,500 athletes, they have a fan base of about 30 million people globally. So we are looking to activate a percentage of that fan base into our ecosystem. And then we're looking to monetize that by bringing exclusive merchandise, the ability for fans to connect directly with athletes, be able to access digital profiles on each athlete, be able to follow their journey, and obviously use the platform to deliver stories, that the athletes want to share, and various other ways that fans can become invested in that journey. The good, the bad, the challenges, the obstacles. It's not just about the medals and the things that happen for a very small percentage of those athletes. It's also the social impact of what athletes actually do in terms of becoming good role models for the youth, being able to create change, deliver stories, deliver messages that are important to the world.
And what would that profile of those athletes be that you're trying to get onto your system?
So what we did was we started building out a database after Tokyo, and that encompassed all of the top performing athletes from Africa that went to Tokyo. So we really just started building a database from scratch. I wanted to get a feel of how many top performing athletes there were, and Tokyo wasn't obviously a typical Olympics, but at that time it was 2,700 athletes from 36 different sports across 54 different countries. So we started building that database out, collecting various information about each athlete, their notable results, as well as what country and obviously sport they participated in. And then we started looking at their social media channels to get an idea of what their audience and followers was. So that was really the start. Since Tokyo, we've been tracking every sporting event on the global stage across all of those 36 different sports. We basically go and look to see who's participating. We see if they're already on our database. If not, we add them to the database. If they are on the database, we obviously update their results. So over the last 18 months to 2 years, we've been building that database out. It now sits at about 4,500 athletes across those different sports and countries. And in building these digital profiles using AI and using various tools that we have, we've basically built out LinkedIn for athletes, if you think of it like that. So every athlete has a profile. We've already pulled in all of their notable results, their world rankings, and we've created a space that an athlete can now use to deliver brands that support them, tell their stories, upload more information about themselves, access offers and deals. So the phase that we're in at the moment with Podium Pursuit is that we're now onboarding those athletes. So we're making contact with each athlete. We have, over the last 2 years, also been running our own social media. So we've been celebrating and recognizing their moments. So in a lot of cases, these athletes are already aware of who we are. We've been interacting, writing stories about them, and having interaction. And now what we're doing is going through an onboarding process, which is getting each athlete to claim their profile, so that they can set their username and password and start to use the platform to start to build their brand. We also help them set up a crowdfunding campaign. We help them to find ways to monetize their brand. And as we move forward, we will start connecting them with brands that are obviously interested in supporting them as athletes, as well as finding new ways to generate access to funding in some shape or form.
And in terms of your business model, is it a revenue share split with the athlete?
So we have a couple of different revenue models within the project as a whole. The fan engagement platform is obviously the digital clubhouse that we're sort of building this ecosystem into. So on one level, the fan engagement platform provides for advertising, sponsorship, various commissions and rebates that can be made through sale of merchandise and various other products and services through our partners. So that's the one side of it. On the second side, we have a broadcast component, which is the storytelling side, where we will be doing storytelling behind the scenes, interviews with athletes, and starting to build up documentary type series, following particular athletes through their journeys. So there is a broadcast rights license component that also comes into that. And then the third aspect of it is the digital collectibles and the NFTs that we will start to roll out in the sort of um, period that follows once we've activated that.
And from a user side, how beneficial is it for them to have these immersive experiences with these athletes? Is it just this this passion on their side to be part of the athlete's journey? Is that what allows them to buy in
I
to your
think
platform?
I think that there are a number of levels. I mean, I think we all understand that sport has the ability to unite us as nations, as people, especially when we're winning. But I suppose to a large degree, people who are passionate about sport also understand that it isn't always about winning. And a lot of the time, the win only comes after many, many losses. So I think, there are different personas in what we call the fans. There will be fans who follow a particular athlete in a particular sport and want to feel part of that journey in some shape or form. You've got other types of fans who maybe follow a team and not a specific athlete, but they follow a team, good, bad, and indifferent. And then I think you have the sort of what we call the fan investor, which is possibly someone who is passionate about sport and passionate about seeing athletes succeed, to these top podiums of the world, but at the same time is also wanting to invest in something that they can feel that they are part of. So I suppose the narrative is away from typical donations and crowdfunding, and it's actually more of an investment narrative, which is how do we invest money into assisting our athletes to achieve, because the impact of them achieving is way broader or far more impactful than necessarily the medal that they might win. So I think, there are many fan investors who are invested in sport in some form of passion that also acknowledge the impact that athletes do have from a social perspective. And, many of those athletes may never get a podium in their entire lifetimes, but just the fact that they got to an Olympics, made them a top performing athlete, but it's all the things that they do with that, and how I think investors can help to ignite the impact that athletes can actually make on, the countries they come from, the towns that they live in, the people that they are connected with, both while they are playing their sport, as well as once they've transitioned from sport into the next career. Because in most sports, around 30, when our careers are just getting going, theirs are almost ending. So, I think that, we're trying to attract also investors who see the potential of what athletes can bring to the party and to, improving the world for humanity.
And you're currently raising for your athlete fund. Talk to me in terms of the benefits for that investor and returns.
Okay, so what we're doing with the platform is we've tokenized the asset, being the digital platform, and we are offering investors, we're doing a capital raise both here in South Africa as well as in the US. We are focusing in on $1.5 million as the kickstart for the Athlete Impact Fund, with the idea being that the Impact Fund will be able to start funding individual athletes, both participating in individual sports as well as team sports across the continent. The business itself looks to break even in year 3. And we will be offering our investors through this tokenization component effectively profit share debentures. So the investors are investing in a token or tokens that gives them a return based on the success of the project.
So hence that's where NFTs come in. That's where we spoke about Web3 and this immersive experience. And of course, if I'm understanding you correctly, from the investor side, they are essentially they'd want that NFT to become more valuable as the athlete progresses, and essentially the success of the athlete means that they have a success in that investment.
No, not really. So the token itself is not an NFT. The token is really just it's the element that recognizes that they are an investor in the project. Yes, we will have NFTs and we will have digital collectibles within the environment of the platform that investors or fans can purchase. But the capital raise is specifically getting investors to fund the initial start of the Athlete Impact Fund in a at a time where we're obviously still building the platform out and building the audience. So it's what's going to be used to fund the athletes while we're building the platform and getting the fan base into the platform. So before we fully monetize it, we need to be able to kickstart the Athlete Impact Fund. So 80% of the capital raise will be allocated directly to athletes. The other 20% will be used for some further personalization of the platform and some working capital, obviously from a marketing point of view, to be able to attract more fans and get them on board. But the investor is effectively being offered a profit share debenture in the project.
Okay, thank you for clarifying that. What is your opinion on the future of sport and the interactiveness from a fan's point of view?
I think that, with the introduction of Web3 and the blockchain and these sort of fan engagement type of platforms, I do believe that fans will be more connected to the athletes that they support and obviously the teams that they are passionate about. I think that sports brands globally are all moving to digital propositions, because within a stadium environment, there are only so many tickets and only so many seats that can be sold. I think that streaming and the ability for fans to access content and be more interactive is becoming more and more prevalent and more needed. The youth of today do not watch and consume sport the way we consume sport or our parents consume sport. So I think that the brands that are wanting to future proof their brand will all be focusing in on digital offerings, opportunities for fans to engage directly with the athletes, with the teams, and find new ways and new alternative revenues that can flow back into the sport. Because as viewing changes, I think also the financial models around broadcast rights will also change.
And do you see this as challenging in the coming months and years?
I don't really see it as challenging. I see it as exciting. I see it as many opportunities, new projects, new technologies. I think artificial intelligence will also bring a lot more to fans, of being able to be more immersive, interacting more with the data and the information that comes off the back of these sporting events or these athletes in terms of their numbers. So I don't see it necessarily as challenging. I see it as opportunities to do great things.
Okay. And talk to me about next steps and what are you most looking forward to in the coming months?
So I think our main focus over the next quarter is to get the capital raise underway so that we can start to impact in some shape or form athletes who are going to be going to Paris this year. It's not just the physical arriving at an Olympic Games, it's all the preparation and the training camps and the preparation events that happen pre that. So while in many cases the countries in Africa's IOCs will be covering costs to get to Paris, it's the phases that happen before that that often also need to be funded, to get to international competitions as preparation for Paris. So we would like to get the capital raise underway so that we can already start to impact some of those teams. The other focus for us will be on onboarding the athletes and getting our brand ambassadors in place, as well as getting athletes that are on our program to start benefiting from the benefits that we have. We already have airline tickets in place. We're signing up and onboarding a number of different partners in different areas. So even as far back as October last year, we were already funding athletes with access to discounted airline tickets to Europe, and other products or operating expenditure that athletes incur. So we're going to be really getting that side of the business operational, start to talk about more of the successes that are happening in that space, and helping as many teams as possible to do what funding requirements they have. So if I circle back to South Africa, I mean, the South African national hockey men's and women's teams have both qualified for Paris, but are both trying to get funding in place ready for Paris. So while they're participating this week in Ghana at African Games, as soon as they return, they need to be doing training camps. They need to be going to Europe for various, international competitions in the preparation, and that needs to be funded. So, we're looking at ways of how we can use our platform to help them access funding, access both from an investment perspective as well as from a crowdfunding or sponsorship perspective.
How much of help and assistance do you get from the public sector?
So locally, not a lot. So, I mean, generally, crowdfunding and donation type platforms, which we have built into our project, usually end up being friends and family. You know, the reality of the situation is it's very rare that somebody will just read a story about somebody who's looking to fund and, you know, open their checkbook and start to pay out. So, you know, I think crowdfunding and donation platforms have a place. And as I said, they are a feature within our platform. But I think that the reality of the situation is that, you know, it generally is your friends and family who end up donating. So we don't find that the public sector is really as aggressive. And also setting up a campaign doesn't necessarily mean that money is going to arrive. You know, it needs to be promoted, it needs to be aired, you know, PR needs to be done, radio interviews, TV interviews, etc. I mean, an example I will give you is the Hockey Fives women's national team for Hockey Fives went to Oman in January. At the end of November last year, we were contacted by the head coach to say it's a self-funded event, that she needed to raise R500,000 by the middle of January to be able to get her team to Oman for this inaugural World Cup. So, you know, the timing over December and the sort of festive season is not the most ideal season to be doing fundraising. But we managed to, on our platform, set up a crowd fund. We got her onto various radio stations, TV stations, and started pushing out content on social media. And we were able to raise 620,000 Rand over that period.
Wow.
She got her team to Oman, and they actually finished fourth. Wow. Overall in the first World Cup. So imagine what they could have done if they had been funded earlier and been able to do preparation for that event. So, you know, we do have a number of successes already. You know, over and above the 26 African riders that we were funding from 2019 to 2022. And in that time, we turned out 5 national team riders, as well as 2 African continental team champions. So, you know, we have some success, but it's not an easy process to get people to get behind that, which is why we feel that we need to change the narrative from purely being dependent on social media for donations and crowdfunding rather into an investment angle where an investor is investing in the platform that has the capability to be sustainable and commercially driven.
Amazing. Rebecca, thank you. This was very insightful. Thank you for the impact that you're also making with athletes on this continent. And I'm looking forward to what ProTouch has to offer in the future.
Thank you. Thanks very much.
Cool. Thank you.